a webinar. There should be no other people being seen. You can send questions to me in the chat box directly to me, and if you have questions, I'll try to do those in the end. There's also a Q&A feature. Well, it is 7:01, and I'd like to go ahead and get started on this. I just want to thank you for joining us this evening, and I want to go ahead and just open us up with a prayer. Heavenly Father, thank you for bringing us together this evening. We pray for the health and safety of all those gathered and in our community. We also pray for healing in our country. We ask this in your name. Amen. Okay, so we're going to get started. Your children took the pre-ACT this year in October, and I just wanted to start with what our school-wide testing protocol is in the fall for grades 9 through 12. So in 9th grade, your child took the CWRA. That stands for the College Work Readiness Assessment. We use that for internal purposes. So we use 9th grade as kind of a baseline to see where students are at that point. And then those are just kind of saved for a couple of years. The 10th grade students take a pre-ACT. 11th grade students take a PSAT NMSQT. That NMSQT stands for National Merit Scholarship Qualifying Test. And then we come back around, and in 12th grade, the students take the CWRA again, just to see what the growth is. And that, like I said, is for internal purposes at Marist, to gauge how the education is for our students. So the pre-ACT, what exactly is it? It is an assessment specifically designed for sophomores. We sometimes get questions why we don't give the PSAT to our sophomore students. There is now a PSAT 10. But all that is the regular PSAT offered in the spring for 10th graders. The pre-ACT was specifically designed for 10th graders and has the questions aimed at students in that grade. It is practice and a predictor for the ACT, but considerably shorter. It does have all 4 of the sections that are also tested on the ACT: English, math, reading, and science reasoning. Now, they take the 4 scores, those 4 scores, and an average is called the composite score. And then now they also give a STEM score, which is the average of the science and the math score. It gives in the answer, in the answer document that you received, you got detailed on the types of questions that were asked. And it also gave you an answer key to show what the answer should have been, and then what the student also did. And then on the inside of on the left-hand inside cover, there was a career interest inventory. Now, students took the test in different classrooms, and some of the proctors did not have the students fill that portion out. It is not part of the assessment. It's simply a career inventory. So if your child, if that's totally blank, it just means that the career interest inventory wasn't given in that classroom. It's okay. We're going to be doing another career interest inventory with all 10th graders in the spring, use science. So there are other opportunities to do that. So starting with the first page, just to explain what you're looking at, you'll see on the left-hand side, the composite score. That's that average of the 4 scores, not this. It doesn't include STEM, because STEM itself is an average as well. The composite score is that average of the math, science, English, and reading score. If a student were to get a score like 21.25, the composite score would be a 21. If the student's average was 21.5, the composite score would be a 22. So they round up, but if the score is at 0.5 or higher. The STEM score is simply the average of math and science. What the shaded blue area is, so it's the dark blue line is specifically the score that the student got in that area. The shaded box around it is kind of the range that could be expected on that given day for a student. Because we all know we walk in to take tests or to our day, and we all have different, maybe that day the student didn't eat breakfast, didn't feel right or something. So there's always a certain amount of range of variability that is accounted for within the test. So that's the range that on that given day that the student could have expected to score that day. So down below, though, it gives the predicted ACT composite score. And so for a composite score of 19, it says the predicted ACT score is 20 to 23, a little bit higher. I'm going to talk a little bit more about how Marist students tend to do when they go in and retake the ACT again. This career readiness certificate information isn't something we're really care a lot about from a college readiness perspective, but there are states that use the ACT as actually a work readiness assessment for their workforce. In the corner here is the rank, how this score would rank for the entire US. This isn't just college going students though, it's for anybody who would take the test. On the inside, it's going to have, or sorry, further down on page 1, it's going to have a little bit more detailed results. So within math, these are all the different sections or types of questions that were asked. Under preparing for higher math, they asked about number and quantity, algebra, functions, geometry, statistics, and probability. If your child's just in geometry this year, it might, he or she may not have done that well. But basically, you're able to see how many in each area of the questions were asked and how your child did answering those questions. The other thing that could play into it is the questions have different degrees of difficulty. So if the harder questions were more modeling questions, they just might be higher level math and the student wasn't ready for it. Science, it doesn't actually ask specific questions about science, but more about how to interpret scientific data. Same thing on the ACT as well. So how well can you read a graph and make inferences from the data given? English the English section is more grammar. So fixing sentences, fixing paragraphs, that. And then the reading is being a comprehension. They have a little thing about whether they can understand complex texts after that. So on the inside cover, I was saying this is the career interest inventory. So if it's totally blank, your child didn't fill it out. Most students, however, did fill out your high school course plans. Now, compared to core. One thing I want everybody to understand is that this was self-reported. And sometimes when students are completing that information on the answer key, they do not actually fill out, they don't complete all the they don't complete it correctly. For instance, they might, they say, well, I've only done 2 years of math so far, so they fill it in, and that's where it is. It ends at 2 years. What we want you to know is that everybody at Marist takes 4 years of math, 4 years of English. They have to take 3 years of science because they have to take biology, chemistry, and physics. But almost all students take 4 years because the university system of Georgia requires 4 years of science. And then all students take 3 years of social studies. So if for some reason your child checked something where it wasn't what core was expected to be, don't worry about it. They just didn't understand the question. So the last 2 pages is the actual item analysis for all the different tests. So in this case, in math, it tells you how many they answered correctly, how many they didn't answer, which, you know, for now, it used to be that there were penalties for wrong answers on the SAT. There are no longer any penalties for wrong answers on the ACT or SAT. So students should always answer all the questions, because they're not gonna, there's no difference between left blank or getting it wrong, so they might as well guess. But anyway, it tells them how many they answered correctly, and then how many they omitted and how many they incorrectly answered. If you do see where like there are a whole bunch down here that they didn't get to, that's just they may have run out of time. And that is something that students can work on with their testing, is how to be better time managers with it. So over here is the correct answer for each question, and you have the test booklet, so you can actually look at the questions. You can see the answers. If there is a different letter over here, it was what the student actually put on the answer key. So you can look at it and say, well, you know, how did the student actually come up with E instead of getting the correct answer B? So that's kind of how the item analysis works. So that's everything in the answer key and that data. And like I said, I can answer some more questions later, but want to talk to you a little bit about the ACT. Down here, if you want to go in and look at this data that they published this fall, they published data that showed students who took the pre-ACT in 10th grade, what the improvement was on the ACT when they took it again as seniors. Now, the thing I could not find in the data, because I'm going to give you Marist data and how much the improvement we see on students, is I couldn't find in their report, was this strictly based on the highest single sitting a student took it? Was it the last time a student took it, meaning the seniors, because they would have only taken the pre-ACT one time. But this score, I don't know if it's the last time they took it, the highest they took it, their highest single individual section, because the ACT now allows for super scoring. So that's something I don't know. But what they found was that the increase on average for 200,000 students went up by this amount in each area, anywhere from, I'm sorry, I did not fix this here, it should be 1.3. So that difference, my math was bad here, should be 1.3 up to 3.5 on the English section. So this is Marist, and I don't know if that's in the way, whoops, sorry, I'm gonna go back, I think, there we go. I was going to try to move this out of the way. I don't know if it was in yours. This is what we see for Marist students. And I mean, part of that is our students do test prep. Some of them, a lot of them will take a class. Some of them will do individual tutoring. I want you to know that any amount of test prep, whether a student does that alone or with a tutor, can help. My own children, we lived in South Georgia actually when they were finishing high school. They didn't have access to tutors. They did self-study on their own, and both of them raised their scores. I say both of them, I have 3 children, but one of them was an SAT test taker and he took a class. But the other 2, the older ones, their ACT scores were better, and so they prepped and were able to do that individually on their own. So if you look at this, I mean, it's quite a shocking difference, especially for English, that Marist students went up an average of 7.1 points. Now, the thing that's interesting here is that this class of 2021 has 190 pre-ACT test taker, or has 199 students. So 190 of them were there and part of the pre-ACT. 175 of these students chose to take an ACT. So I will, so 175 took the ACT. You'll see that's a much higher number than took the SAT, and it ended up doing that. So with math, we improved by 4.7. So the lowest improvement was in reading, but you can see what the average is for Marist students to start with. So even over the improvement that the ACT students saw, this is the improvement of Marist students over the improvement there. So we tend to see students, and so our average composite is a 30, but you're supposed to report it as a mid-range, meaning what's the 25th to 75th percentile. So 25% of Marist students score at or below a 27, and 25% score at or above a 33. And so 50% are right there in the middle. I did have a question from somebody asking about prep classes and asking if Marist has prep classes. We have used a company before to do prep classes. They have all, right now, they're all virtual. So we'll wait to see what is available online. We've received a lot of information recently from, you know, a lot of companies who we might not have used previously because they've always been virtual, but that's what they do. And since we're not able to do them in-person classes right now, we'll be sending out information about that. A new company, Revolution Prep, sent something around where students can just sit and take a practice SAT or ACT and get a base score if they would like to do that. So of course, anytime you do those, the company is going to try to sell you additional prep, test prep opportunities. But yeah, I did ask specifically in a meeting about that, and I was told that fewer than 30% actually sign up for additional prep. So, but we'll send out additional information about that. So the differences between the pre-ACT to the SAT, so you saw that big difference in how much higher the ACT score gets. Well, the ACT is quite a bit longer than the pre-ACT. And when I say it's 3.5 hours, that is before, if a student decides to do writing, which I want to say right now, unless your child is going to go to the military academy, at this point, that's the only school that is requiring the writing section on the ACT. Occasionally it'll say suggested, but if it's not required, used to be the University of California did as well. We tell students, you know, you don't need to sit and do the writing, but if you're going to apply to West Point, you need to do the writing section when that comes up. So you can see how many, for every single question or every single test, there is a minute or less to answer all the questions. So the ACT is kind of known as a speed demon test, meaning the student has to, they need to know how to make sure their timing stays right. Of course, there's going to be higher level questions. So the highest you could get on any subsection on the pre-ACT was a 35, and a perfect score would be a 35 on the pre-ACT. Because the ACT has harder questions, it goes through trigonometry. On the math section, you can get up to a 36. And I also say the other thing down here, standard time students, anytime you go and sit for an ACT, you're also going to take something called an experimental question or section that's always at the end of the test. And they use that to come up with questions that they're going to use in future tests. So now that your child has taken the pre-ACT, next year they will take the PSAT in MSQT. It'll be taken in October. It is designed for 11th grade students. It is a predictor for the SAT. It is the entry point for that National Merit Scholarship Corporation, that program, and the national recognition programs that are operated by the College Board. That's for African American, Hispanic, Indigenous, and rural and small town students. So the NMSQT commended is the top 4% of test takers nationwide. For the class of 2021, so the current seniors, their cutoff for commended was 209. And then semifinalists is the top 1/2 of 1% in the state. So every state cutoff is a little bit different. Georgia's is on the higher side, and part of that reason is because in the public schools, they pay for 10th graders to take the test, and some school districts pay for 11th graders to take it, but other schools make students opt in if 11th graders are going to take it. So not as many students actually in the state of Georgia take it in 11th grade than as take it in the 10th grade. But you have to be an 11th grader to qualify for national merit. And this year that cutoff number was 218. We had 6 National Merit semifinalists in the class of 2021, and then we had 6 more students recognized through the National Recognition Program, 3 African American students and 3 Hispanic students. So on the PSAT, there's going to be 2 scores that come out of it. The evidence-based reading and writing score, and then the math score. And the evidence-based reading and writing score is based on it, kind of the combination of 2 sections. I think that's on the next slide. But the highest you can get, you know, you might have heard that the SAT is 800 on a section. Well, that's normally true, but like with the pre-ACT, where the score is slightly lower based because the questions are slightly easier, the same is true for the PSAT. So the highest a student can get in either section is 760 for a combined highest total of 1520. So the way, there are 4 test sections and they go in this order. First comes reading, and then writing and language. And the combination of those 2 sections give that evidence-based reading and writing score. Then for math, there's a no calculator section of math, and then there's a calculator section for math. You can see there are actually more questions, or I mean, there's more time per question. I'm sorry, I'm reading the question. It's kind of, I need to figure out how to have my 2 screens so I can have the questions on one and some are on the other. I did want to say though that with the SAT and PSAT, you get more time per question, but there are also more words per questions when you're actually reading those different questions. So those, and when they're doing the math, there are actually all questions on the pre-ACT are multiple choice. So when you looked at the questions, you could see it's either A, B, C, D, or E, F, G, H, those types of things. On the PSAT and on the SAT, there's actually student-produced responses on the SAT, and they have to actually answer the questions in the actually write the answer down. For instance, they might be asked, what's the sum of 5 and 8? And they actually have to write in 13, and then they have to bubble in those numbers. So that's called a student-produced response. So I want to show you the SAT to PSAT to SAT improvement for students. On average, our students score a 1213 on the PSAT and a 1323 on the ACT. Here is the mid-range. This is what I was talking about, though, as the huge difference. You saw we had 175 of our current seniors have taken an ACT, only 85 have taken an SAT. Now, some of that could be because of COVID and the fact that there weren't many tests offered, and then when they did come back and get offered, it may have been hard for them to get registered. And we were able to actually offer the ACT at Marist. So any senior who wanted to take it in September and October was able to take it. It could have happened that way, but we have noticed that our students tend to definitely take the ACT at a higher rate than the SAT. Part of that is they go to a test prep person, they do the sample test, they say, we can prep you on these tests, and they tend to do better. But that is not every student by any means. There are certain students who, because the amount of time they're given, they will just do better on the SAT. So the difference, there isn't as much time difference between the SAT and the PSAT, only a few minutes, but they do also, there's an optional writing section. Same thing goes for it as goes for the ACT writing thing, and where that's going to go. So it's, you don't need to do it unless your child is going to the military academy. Now, I'm also going to say that with a caveat, I don't know, next year, maybe there's a section, a set of schools that say, nope, we're now going to require the writing again. So just you know, we're always having to keep up with what the latest trends are and what colleges are requiring. So anything I say today is as of today. And things can change over the summertime or, you know, at any time really, but they usually give a couple of years notice, thankfully, for things changing. So you can see the only section that really is at all kind of needs to be speedy is the writing and language section, that where there's less than a minute per question. The rest of them all have more time on all of them. When you get to the SAT, it also goes to that other testing difference. It goes, each section goes from 200 to 800, so the total score can be from 400 to 1600. Same thing I just said a minute ago, important of testing for the future. We really do not know. I mean, it is, everybody is trying to guess. So many schools went test optional this year. There's a lot of questions whether they will continue to at least offer test optional for students who can't actually test. We told students if they felt comfortable, we felt like they should test. If they felt it was safe and their families felt it was safe, we do have students and families where they just did not want to take that risk, and we certainly understand, and that is why a lot of schools were test optional this year. But the state schools in Florida never went test optional, so they are still requiring test scores this year for admissions at all Florida schools. There is a company who keeps up with all the test optional schools out there. It's called fairtest.org. And so I want to encourage you to look at that. A school that has been very popular with Marist students for a long time and who's been test optional now for 10 years is Wake Forest University. So when a school is test optional, they usually use other things to be able to determine, like Wake Forest does interviews. But what some of the really highly selective schools found this year is that their applicant pools went way up with the, you know, a lot of people think that's because they were test optional, and so students put applications out. The one thing I do want you to know is that regardless of it, the academics, meaning how a student performs in schools, and the level of courses they take are still more important than test scores for college admissions. And that's to almost everywhere. There are a few schools that, you know, if you're going to get a high school diploma and you score at a certain level, yes, you can get in just with your test score. But, you know, majority of schools, it is looking at your academics and first before test scores come into play. So big differences between ACT and SAT. Now that I've told you about the two tests, the biggest difference everybody will say is there is that dedicated science reasoning section on ACT that is not on the SAT. Now, sometimes students say, oh, I don't want to do that. But like I said, it's a science reasoning test, which means that it's how to interpret graphs. Marist students, the academics at Marist really prepares them pretty well for this test. Yes, they probably need to, well, let me practice the questions, make sure I've got them right, but they're going to do well, especially if they're in an AP science. It's one reason why when we give some advice, we tend to, especially if you're in that pre-cal in your junior year, or Algebra 3 with trig, and then you're also maybe doing an AP science, we tend to suggest students wait till the middle of the junior year to start. But anyway, so the ACT gives a composite score that's an average. And one of the questions was, does it go, is the ACT in order of difficulty on the questions? It depends on the section, whether the questions go in degree of difficulty. For math, they do. But within the reading section, they are not in order of difficulty. And I would have to check for sure to make sure I knew for the other sections. I believe they are more random, but like I said, I will verify that. The score itself is simply based on how many you got correct in that section. So to get a 1, you'd basically have to miss everything to be able to get a 1. And the average for nationwide on the ACT is around a 20.5. Like you saw the average at Marist, it's about a 30. But the average nationwide is based on all students who had taken ACT. And there are some states who use it as a required test for all students before they graduate. So the ACT has those 4 sections, 4 different scores. Those are averaged together to get you the composite. The SAT has the 4 sections, but 2 of them go to evidence-based reading and writing. 2 of them go to math, and then those are combined for the total score. If you've ever seen one of the new SAT test reports, which there are samples of these on the College Board website, they do give sub-scores in social studies and science, and then some more sub-scores within math and within English. So you could see those, but they're scales of like 1 to 15. They're smaller scores. A couple of years ago, there were questions whether colleges might start using those sub-scores. I don't know of any at this point who are. They're strictly looking at the sub-scores for evidence-based reading and writing and math. So as I said before, the ACT is kind of this sprint test. How fast can they get done? Move on to the next section. Whereas the SAT, they have more time, but if you looked at a sample test, you would see that the questions are longer. The SAT has a math section that does not allow the use of calculators, whereas the ACT math calculator can be used the entire time. And then SAT has that certain set of questions that is student produced responses, meaning they have to actually solve the problem, write the answer into it. So super scoring, I kind of mentioned this earlier when I was talking about I wasn't sure how the ACT got their improved score. So first we'll talk about super scoring. What super scoring is taking if a student takes the test more than 1 time, so say a student took the ACT 2 different times, and one time they had a composite score of 28, and one time they had a composite score of 30, but when they got the 28, they had an English section where they got a 32, but the time they got the 30, they got an English section of 30. It would mean that they would take the highest, that section here, and combine it with the other high sections on the other test to get a new composite score. So that's super scoring. Or if you take the SAT twice and you have an evidence-based reading and writing, it's probably easier with this, a 590 one time and a 700, so you get a 1290, and then the next time you get a 630 and you get a 660 and you still have a 1290, they would use the 630 and the 700 to get a 1330. That's a super score. So it's using higher subsections of different tests to get a new score. Both Georgia and Georgia Tech allow super scoring and use it, but the state schools in Alabama do not super score. Auburn doesn't super score, Alabama doesn't super score. There are other states as well that don't super score. So you've got to kind of look at what the policy is. It used to be that Clemson didn't super score the ACT, but they did super score the SAT. Well, the ACT came out this year and said that yes, you can super score the ACT, so now they're allowing that. The other terminology, score choice, is something to think about for later, or as, you know, depending on how many times, because sometimes people say, oh, I'll just take the test 5 or 6 times. For some school, that's fine. You know, UGA is just going to look at what's your highest English and your highest math score on the ACT. They only actually use those 2 scores on the ACT. They don't use the reading and the science reasoning, you know, over however many times. So that's, you know, a student would be fine. But there are other schools, and not many of them. Georgetown is the most notable school that says they do not allow score choice. What that means is you have to report every time you actually took the test to them. So if you took it 6 times and then finally, you know, the last time you got 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, 31, 32. You're like, oh, good, I got my 32 or whatever score. You still have to send the other 5 times as well to Georgetown. They require that. So I want to talk to you about the testing calendars. Each test has 7 different dates that it's offered. Now, as Marist has been a testing site for the SAT for many years. And right now we administer it in August, October, March, and June. The ACT, we tried to become a test center 2 years ago and were told that there were too many options in Atlanta to be able to be a test center. Well, with COVID happening, they allowed us to set up to be a test center, and we are an unlisted test center for Marist students only. We did September and October for our seniors only, and then we've been doing December and February for our juniors. We'll also do April for our juniors, but you know, I'm going to talk a little bit about best timing. It really is, we do tend to see the highest scores for Marist students, and that'll be on the next slide, at the end of the junior year. Our general advice is test if and when it fits the students' and families' feelings of safety junior year, winter or later. They should prepare at some point. They can either take the free prep through Khan Academy or through the ACT. They have official books. They have all that. You can hire a tutor, but many test prep companies actually offer free SAT and ACT comparison tests. As I said, they will try to sell you prep afterwards, but you don't have to. Do look at what your schedule, your activities are, and create a testing calendar based on that. We do think that students may need to begin earlier or later in the junior year, depending on circumstances. Like you might want to start in December of the junior year. And just many students do continue to test into the senior year. So after I showed this presentation to all the counselors, and some of the college counselors came back and said, please make sure the parents know that, you know, test prep companies have a vested interest in having you test early and often, because you'll be going back and you'll be taking additional prep as you're, you know, oh, I've got to take it again, or I've got to take it again. So watch and take their advice with caution. For the majority of students, and I would say even before this year, when testing was shut down in April and June, we saw over half of the class, the senior class, taking a test at least one more time in the fall of their senior year. And we tend to see the highest test scores either at the end of the junior year or at the beginning of the senior year. There's an advantage to having more Marist coursework. Like I said, they test on the ACT and the SAT. They have some trigonometry taught in there. There's just some maturity. You've got a little more English. So, I mean, it's good to have that classwork and the prep, and you might have taken it once and then taken it again. But without a drastic change of some sort, meaning you're doing some additional prep after having done none, maybe you qualified for extended time, there may be diminishing returns. So test companies tend to see improvement in test scores up to the 3rd time, and then there tends to be, it flattens out. Now, one thing I will say is sometimes you've been told, well, we think this is going to be your better test, or you like a test better than another one. I mean, your child does, or if students, if you're on here, you might like it better. But I tell my student, tell story of student from 4 years ago who took the ACT 4 times, made a 27 every single time, 4 times, 27. And that was with prep. Finally, they said, well, we're just going to give the SAT a try. And he scored a 1420. Now, 27 is equivalent to like a 1280 on the SAT. So when he got that 1420 in December of his senior year, it opened up, you know, so many more opportunities, from scholarships to admissions. So if you find you're just kind of stuck and you don't see any improvement on one test or the other, try the other test. Also, here's this thing about what I'm telling you today may not be the same next week, next year. A lot could change. You're a sophomore, your child's a sophomore, so there's really 2 years before they're going through the process and a year before they really need to get going on testing. So just make sure that you're keeping up to date. What is the current testing requirements for schools? I will send this actually out on a sheet as a PDF. These are just links to practice tests for the PSAT, the SAT, the ACT. Khan Academy has the free SAT prep, and the ACT Academy has free prep. So there are a lot of opportunities out there. This is just the free stuff. Like I said, I always suggest to my students, go get the real ACT prep book, or go get the real SAT prep book, because then, especially, I don't know if things will change and they'll start doing computer-based testing, but as long as there's paper-based testing, you can actually time yourself and keep up with it. And, you know, they found that if you just practice questions the way that they're being asked, that you can raise the score. You just understand how it's being asked. I tell Marist students, there are some things you might not have quite learned. Maybe you haven't quite gotten to the math yet, but you know almost all the material on these tests. What you don't know is how it's being asked. And so understanding the test and how they're asking the questions will help a student do better on it. So I'm to the questions. So now I'm going to come up here and see if I can answer these questions in here. So a question about, when do students take the ACT and the SAT? Like I said, we suggest students start in winter of their junior year. So basically, the SAT, there's a time you can take it in December. The next SAT isn't till March of the junior year. So sometimes there's an issue for a student who might have, who might be doing a spring sport, or it's always during our spring break, actually. So it's either the first weekend or second weekend of our spring break. They're going on a trip, so they can't do it. So it's kind of, that's why it's important to look at the testing calendar and make a plan. When are they going to take the test? Both tests are designed to be taken at the end of junior year, beginning of senior year. So our suggestion is that by the end of junior year, everybody should have taken each test once, or maybe you did a practice test and found out, nope, I'm not doing the SAT, so you might take the ACT, you know, twice. But we want you to have at least 2 tests by the end of the junior year. Some students are done. They get the high score they want and they don't take it again in the senior year. So another question is, what's an ideal score to receive on the ACT? That is a really tough question. What you can do is you can look up the schools that your child is interested in and look at what their mid-range was for test scores. This year, since so many schools were test optional, basically schools told us to tell students, don't share your scores if you're not in that mid-range. So at Boston College, their mid-range was a 32 to a 34. So you would have gone test optional if you didn't have a 32. So at other schools, the mid-range is even higher. And what we did notice this year, and so don't look necessarily at what is the mid-range score for a student for the class of 2021, because really, you know, a lot of students wouldn't test optional if they weren't in the range, and that has caused the scores to go even higher. Go back and look and see what the mid-range were for the class of 2020 at the school. We don't know what's going to happen in the future with that. The question about the SAT or ACT prep, we have offered those classes at Marist before. We offered a pre-SAT class, a PSAT class this last year as well. We've offered those starting in the summer leading into the PSAT. This year it had to be online. That's the only current issue with the test prep, is that any of the current companies are only doing them virtually. So we have a lot of information about the courses out there. I can send out some information about it. So if you're going into your junior year, summertime can be a good time to take an initial course just to get student comfortable with the kind of material being asked. So there's usually something offered at Marist, or you can pick any one of so many test prep companies that operate within Atlanta to be able to, or online to offer the course. I got something today from a test prep company that was offering the 12 hours of pre-recorded webinar prep free to all of our students. I'll send that information out. They're giving a $100 coupon towards their other tutoring. Of course, that's what they're trying to do, is trying to get students and families to sign up for more paid tutoring after that. Are there any additional questions you might have at this point? Let's see. Okay. What was the average high test scores for this year's class for the pre-ACT? Thank you for asking that question. Usually, I did not do the average for this year's class. I'm sorry, it was still getting uploaded into our CRM, so I can get that to you. In the past, the average pre-ACT score has been somewhere around a 25, 26 for a Marist student. The pre-ACT, the students do zero prep. We don't even go in and tell them this is what you're going to be taking. So I tell parents, don't worry about it. And that's how come we see so much of an improvement when it comes to how well they do on the ACT, because they're not going to walk in and take the ACT without having done that prep in the first place. Student asked, or someone asked about their child missing the pre-ACT. I had someone else have that happen. We have some leftover test booklets, and I can leave it at the front desk, and you can administer it to your child, bring it back to school, and I'll score it for you. So I'm happy to do that if you send me an email, montaguep@marist.com. So like I said, we have a few extras of those that we can help. So are there, let's see, I think I have made it through all the current questions. Does anybody else have any other questions? I know it is almost time for that national championship, although I've got to believe there's at least 30 minutes of pre-game hype to go on. But you're welcome to contact me to ask me other questions after this about the testing. And oh, I do have a question from somebody. I'm sorry, I missed this one earlier. When should students be applying to universities, and when should they be done with test taking so they can apply with their scores? That is an excellent question, and kind of the whole thing around. Our students will start applying to college in the summer. We start our application workshops in August, before the senior year starts. There are a few schools that will allow you to apply right after the junior year ends. Some of those schools may not require a test score to begin with. And you can apply, some schools you can apply to and get admitted and still continue to take tests. so that you might qualify for higher scholarship amounts later. In fact, University of Mississippi will let students actually use a test score clear through the summer before they actually enroll. So say they're enrolling in August, they can take the July ACT score and use that to raise their scholarship dollars. So of course, most seniors do not want to still be taking the ACT or SAT at that point, but so that's why we say students should definitely have 1 or 2 scores by the end of the junior year. That July ACT test date has turned out to be really good. They just added a July date 2 years ago. It used to be they had a June, and then they didn't offer a test again until September. So that July test date has been really good. Students are less stressed. There's not a lot of homework around. I've always liked the June test date as well, because it's always a week after we're out of school at Marist. So they're not doing exams and other stuff. The SAT is right after exams end in June, but you've got a whole nother week where you can prep to take that ACT in June. And for a lot of, for a long time, I've seen real high scores then. Like I said, July has been a good test date. And then for whatever reason, they come back to school, the students, they're filling out their applications. That September ACT and the October SAT are usually kind of another time when we have a rush of Marist students who will actually take those tests and might see better test scores, or which will help towards scholarships. For schools, if you're applying early action, and all this information, we kind of give you more of this in the junior meeting. Early action and early decision are schools that you apply to by November 1st. So early action deadline for Georgia and Georgia Tech is October 15th. So you apply by these early dates. They're going to require a test score that you've tested by that date. But if you're applying regular decision, which might be a January 1st test date, you might be able to use you can use test scores through December of your senior year towards your application. So it just kind of, your college counselor is going to help you decide what's best. Should you apply early action to a school? And early action is non-binding, meaning you can apply to, I'm not going to get into all the nuances around some of the early action. Early decision is binding. So if you apply early decision, and your child's admitted, then they must go. I feel like I've gone into a little bit too much information about that stuff, but we will talk more about all the different application processes. Okay, I think I have answered all the questions in here. Please, like I said, feel free to reach out to me or the other college counselors if you want any other information about testing. Your sophomore child, 2 things I want to let you know. Your child will be assigned a college counselor at the end of this month. They'll get that name at the beginning of February, or the end of January, beginning of February. And 2, you should have received an email from Ms. Brown about the Atlanta case studies. I highly suggest you register your child and you for that, especially if you want to learn more about the college application process. It's a chance where you'll go in and you actually get to read 4 or 5 different applications, and you get to be the admissions committee. So look back, I can't remember when she sent it. She might be sending an update soon, but please take the opportunity to participate in the Atlanta case studies that we're part of. Thank you all, and we will see you soon.